Are you guys, or people you know, thinking any differently about traveling internationally this year?
I'll cop an answer that I saw from a friend of mine from college on Instagram yesterday. She was saying, I really wanted to do a baby moon with my husband in Paris, but because of some complications, we're going to Epcot instead. And she posted a picture of herself in front of the Eiffel Tower in Epcot, and I was like, you and me both, Morgan.
What about you, Catherine?
I didn't previously have international travel plans scheduled for this year, but nothing that has happened recently makes me want to venture abroad, not because I'm worried about how much hate and spite I might get outside of the country as an American, but more so issues with coming back to the United States. You have basically no rights at the border. So even as an American citizen, they can seize your phone. They can seize your laptop. There are all sorts of complications with that. As a journalist, that's problematic, and I don't want to have to get entirely new gadgets so that I can travel abroad. So, a whole bunch of reasons why staying domestic seems more attractive.
I have an easy solution to that. I was going to say I am thinking differently about traveling internationally this year in that I am thinking I may not come home after.
Catherine, I'll also tell you that the China Pavilion at Epcot is fabulous this time of year. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about. I'm Drew Goins, author of the Today's Opinions newsletter.
And I'm Molly Roberts, a columnist at The Post. This week, we're talking about the future of tourism and travel.
Since the wane of the coronavirus, there's been a surge in global travel. But not everybody's been happy about the tourism boom. Some Europeans got so over it that they started putting daily fees to visit certain hotspots. And protesters in Barcelona famously squirted tourists with water guns as they tried to enjoy their tapas. Pretty good, right? The travel jump hit places in the United States hard, too.
Lately, though, the tide is turning everywhere from the French Riviera to, let's go with Acadia National Park. International visits to the United States fell nearly 12% in March, and it's not hard to see why. Not only has President Trump unleashed some angry rhetoric about other countries, tourists are literally getting detained at the border. Forecasts for travel this year are trending down. And suddenly, it seems reasonable to wonder whether we'll soon be begging for tourists to return rather than complaining about crowded beaches. And it seems reasonable to ask, what does it mean if fewer people abroad feel compelled to travel here?
So some people head off for spring break this week and others are planning their summer travel. Now seems like a good chance to talk about how we are feeling about tourism right now. We have our colleague and columnist, Catherine Rampell, to get into it with us. Hi, Catherine, and welcome to Impromptu.
Thanks for having me.
As Molly mentioned, forecasts for travel into the U.S. this year are looking really bad. How much of a hit to tourism do you think that we're going to see this year, Catherine?
I think it's going to be pretty significant. Canadians, for example, are understandably quite peeved at us, their southern neighbor, for not only imposing tariffs on them, but also threatening to invade. And then you have additional administrative barriers. For example, if you're Canadian, you're in the United States for more than 30 days, you're supposed to register with the government, which was not previously the case. So plenty of Canadian snowbirds who might normally spend their winter in Florida now have to figure out, wait, how do I register with the government? And totally reasonable to be worried about these arbitrary detainments as well. So why would anyone come here? Why would anyone spend their dollars here, which isn't maybe they see as implicit support for our government and the way that our president is treating many of our friends and allies? I think we're going to take a big hit. And we'll see it more regionally. Places like Florida, places like Maine, other locations that have historically attracted a lot of tourists.
Yeah, I was curious whether just grumpiness toward a country would play any real role, at least in the longer term, in whether people decide to travel there. I mean, I think about my European travel, and I don't really plan it based on whether some country has elected like a semi-fascist prime minister recently. There'd have to be a more tangible safety issue, visa approval issue to put me off, or like a serious human rights abuse. I'd probably still go to Italy. I don't think they've got a great government right now.
I was thinking about Italy specifically and Giorgia Meloni, like obviously far right. Specifically to me, like as a gay man, they have enacted all sorts of anti-surrogacy stuff that's very unfriendly to gay parents and whatnot. But when I think about vacation in Italy, I think about the Amalfi Coast, right? I'm not thinking about family planning policy enacted by the Italian government. But at the same time, globally, Giorgia Meloni does not occupy the imagination the same way that Donald Trump occupies the imagination. And I do think, Catherine, what you were saying about, well, yeah, there's tariffs, but also literally a threat to invade or annex.
Yeah.
Like, I think that goes beyond annoyance and into the territory of like active hostility, right? Why would I want to go and support this in any way? You know, even if it's just spending some money to get into Acadia National Park, right?
Right.
I want to jump now to the tariff stuff specifically, right? Since we had the last episode of Impromptu with the Tuesday Politics crew, there has been a pause in the tariffs, right? So it's this 90 days of uncertainty. We don't know if they're going to come back on. We don't know what markets are going to do. But what has not gone away is this trepidation about, are we headed for a recession? How is that affecting how you guys are thinking about travel? And how is it affecting how Americans writ large are thinking about travel?
Well, if people are worried about losing their jobs, if Americans are worried about their income going down or prices rising, that means there's less discretionary spending available for non-necessities like going on vacation. So I think that will also be unhelpful
Yep.
to the tourism industry here. It's not just that they may be losing out on customers from abroad. They may be losing out on customers here.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there may be better deals out there, right?
Yeah.
If you're not competing with as many other tourists, American or otherwise, you know, hotels may offer you great bargains. So if you are in a position where you're less worried about your job or otherwise insulated from a lot of the turmoil, and, you know, higher income people tend to be, then there are good bargains to be had, probably.
I do think a bargain comes along, and for a certain type of millennial, even if we are not insulated from the uncertainty, there's this certain fatalism where you say, interest rates have gone so far up, I'm never going to be able to buy a house. I may as well just take this trip to Santorini, right? I have had friends who have, you know, lost their jobs, who were federal workers, and they're like, booking a trip to Puerto Rico because everything is so bad. I found this great deal. Who knows what the future is going to be like? Let me just take advantage of this nice thing and do it now, which feels irresponsible, but also understandable to some extent.
YOLO, right?
Yeah, YOLO, the YOLO economy.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if it turns out that this does mean fewer Americans traveling abroad, I don't know whether places elsewhere in the world will be disappointed because of the lack of tourist dollars or whether they'll be relieved because of the lack of Americans. Yeah, I was thinking about the Canadians, you know, it might be a shame here to have fewer of them because they're probably fairly polite tourists. Maybe I'm dealing in stereotypes and I'm part of the problem, in which case, sorry, but
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm not sure American tourists have a great reputation around the world. So
yeah, I want to talk about that. How much baggage do you carry when you travel, or when you traveled, I suppose?
Emotional or
like the baggage of just being an American navigating the world, especially as, you know, Trump angers so many of our allies, right?
I mean, I have always felt a little embarrassed being an American in other places, even pre-Trump. I'm pretty aware our reputation is basically obnoxious, but I've always seen that embarrassment as trivial and to be shaken off, whereas now there's a bit more substance to the nasty thoughts that I imagine are going through people's heads. A small story, my husband and I were in Japan for our honeymoon on Election Day, and as the reality of Trump's victory was setting in for us and for anyone else who had an iPhone, we were on this cable car up a mountain, and we would speak with our very American accents, and people would look at us kind of appraisingly, trying to gauge our reactions, and eventually some British guy declared, you know, they'll just vote for anyone who makes them feel more powerful than everyone else. I just felt annihilated. I'm blushing on the Miyajima tramway. But, you know, to be fair, the night before we were at a bar and some young Japanese bartenders were saying, oh yeah, our prime minister's an idiot too. So maybe I'm just projecting.
The international fraternity of disgruntled citizens. No, it knows no border.
It's interesting. I do wonder if the composition of Americans who travel abroad is different from the composition of Americans who are here. Like,
Totally.
it would not surprise me if the people who are traveling abroad are the globalists, right? Who hate Trump and who are more embarrassed by him. And so they're taking more of the flack, even though we're like, we didn't vote for him, sorry. Which could very well be the case. Not that will calm any of the ire against us, understandably.
It very much feels like if American diplomats abroad are, quote, the other army, American tourists abroad are the other army. We're out doing apology.
Soft power.
Soft power, exactly. We're out doing apology tour for the whole country. I have felt guilty being an American, even in America, in certain places. I just moved to Washington, D.C. from Hawaii, which is a place that has a very difficult relationship with colonization and tourism. I want to jump into that topic broadly, tourism, class, economy, when we come back from the break.
Welcome back. I'm Molly Roberts, and this is Impromptu. So, Drew and I live in D.C. Catherine, you're in New York City. Both are cities that draw a lot of tourists. And Drew, I was going to say that I shouldn't forget to mention, but you've mentioned it yourself. How surprised I am.
Can you believe it?
That until recently you were a resident of lovely Honolulu, Hawaii. How do you guys think tourists matter to the culture of where you live or have lived? And what's at stake if there are more or fewer of them?
So I will talk about Hawaii and say that, like many tourist hotspots, it's a place that has a really difficult, painful love-hate relationship with tourism. It feels at this point like the economy is totally inextricable from tourism. I did some reporting after the Maui wildfires, and I was talking to this woman who lives on Maui, who works as a housekeeper or worked as a housekeeper. She lost her home, right? We were sitting in the lobby of a hotel that was mostly emergency housing, but was starting to open back up for tourists. And I was asking her what it feels like. And she said, it's so painful. They're here having the best day of their life while I'm having the worst day of my life. And I said, are you ready for Maui to reopen for tourists? And she said, I don't have a choice. Of course I want Maui to reopen for tourists. I don't want to be fired. And that was really painful to hear.
And what about for you, Catherine, in New York or anywhere else you've lived?
New Yorkers are stereotyped as having a lot of disdain for anyone who's not from New York.
No, really?
Shocker. And I will say that in the years following the declaration of the COVID pandemic, I think a lot of us in this city realized, as annoying and in the way as tourists may seem a lot of the time, they're really critical to this local economy. Because, so for example, I'm really into New York theater. Mm-hmm. And the business model of Broadway is hard enough in normal times, but is just completely broken when you don't have that influx of tourist dollars to see the shows that we also want to see. They need to subsidize it too. And the same thing for lots of restaurants and other services that locals enjoy, but are able to stay in business in part because those vendors are not only serving us. I mean, it's not as, I think, historically or socioeconomically fraught as what Drew is describing in Hawaii, but it is definitely a vulnerability that I think a lot of New Yorkers did not realize we had, that if people can't come here or don't want to come here or are afraid to come here, that hurts New Yorkers as well.
Yeah, I feel similarly about D.C. I mean, on the one hand, I'm thinking the last time I even considered going to see the cherry blossoms, because it's just so mobbed, was when I was in high school and Instagram had just been invented and you just needed all the material you could get to build up your follower base. And now, no way. But if there were fewer tourists, maybe I'd go there again and, I don't know, do a photo shoot with my dog. But I do think overall for DC, it's a loss. And not only from that economic perspective you were talking about, Catherine, I think the United States as a country probably looks better when you come and visit it than when you just watch the news about it. And that's true when you see the splendor of the Grand Canyon, but it's also true, we talked about this a bit last week, when you visit the Smithsonian. That's free. And not only does it show off all the genuinely incredible things that Americans have done or made, it also grapples in an honest and compelling way with all the awful things. Both of you were talking about soft power earlier. There's a reason Saudi Arabia is pouring massive amounts of money into building up a tourism industry. There's an image laundering aspect there. And no, we're not as bad as Saudi Arabia, but I think it's useful for people to really come and see the United States rather than just see what's said about it and absorb the stereotypes of it and meet all the American tourists behaving badly.
What Molly said about Instagram got me thinking about how much the nature of travel has changed over the last couple of years. You know, people are being drawn to lesser known destinations because it's so much easier to spread the word about places on Instagram. And also there's so much cachet for getting to a place first and being in that wave that kind of discovers it and popularizes it on Instagram. You also have options like Airbnb or Vrbo where you can find places to stay that aren't, you know, right in the center of the city. From the tourist perspective, this can be great because you feel like you're getting a more authentic, off the beaten path experience. But for the people who live in these places, life changes sometimes really, really quickly. How do you guys think about this tension? And is there a way to, you know, engage in this off the beaten path tourism, treading lightly and not ruining these places?
There are a lot of places where I think people are happy to welcome you as not an intruder, but just an interested visitor if you're respectful. But the trouble is, if you discover a hidden gem and then you declare it a gem, everybody shows up and it loses its luster. There's a great op-ed I read about Bologna, Italy, where basically every mom and pop shop has been replaced by like a cold cuts chain. Everything is mortadella, everything is meat, because that's what sells to tourists. And of course,
right.
there's a lot more to Bologna. It's one of the oldest universities, but people don't care about that. They don't want the beautiful stationery or the old books. They just want the meat.
Yeah, this TikTok tourism feels so consumptive, right? It like rockets a business to popularity, and then all of a sudden that business is filled with people who saw it on TikTok, and then all of a sudden it's not cool anymore because it's touristy and discovered and there's no authenticity to it.
Yeah, this is no longer Rick Steve that we're talking about, or Lonely Planet?
Lonely
Planet.
When I was living in Hawaii, you would see people post their like secret spots on Instagram, right? But they would geotag it instead of the actual location. They would use this geotag that was really popular that just said, "Keep the Hawaiian Islands beautiful," which, you know, is nice in theory, but then it becomes a question of why are you posting at all? You're just trying to flaunt that you have this secret spot that nobody else knows about so that you could, yeah, exactly. It feels just like awful gatekeeping. So I think my answer for how to tread lightly off the beaten path is not to post about it. Scrapbook about it. You know, cherish these places in your heart. Do not ruin them. If other people don't find them, that's going to be okay. And if other people do find them, it will be because they stumbled upon them, and that makes it all the more magical.
What do you think, Catherine? Is there a better, more moral way to travel?
If you're going to a place like a sacred site, for example, in a country where they're not used to as many tourists. And on the one hand, I think it can be valuable to bring your dollars to these places that are appreciative of having more business. But yes, I agree. It's important to be respectful, and you don't need to show to the world where to go or how awesome certain things are, unless, you know, you really think that the local business or whatever it is would appreciate it. And look, there are some places where you go and they'll give you a card that says, "Here's our Instagram handle. Please tag us," because they want the business. But I think it's different if we're talking about a culturally sensitive or, again, religiously sacred site where I've seen some bad behavior. And it's not about bringing in more money. You know, it's about being respectful.
Ooh, bad behavior. Next episode on Impromptu.
I do want to say, none of this is new, right? I was Googling around to read up on tourism and find my next vacation spot. And I found an essay from The Atlantic called The Immorality of Travel. And I expected this to be from, I don't know, last year. And it was from June 1911.
My God.
And there's a lot of good stuff in there. I highly recommend that people read this thing in full. But I think kind of the thesis statement was, travel is the great epidemic of the modern world, common to most races, wasteful of time and money, disastrous to the places visited, most unbeautiful in all its effects.
Incredible.
Yeah, I don't agree with any of that.
No, I don't either. I love travel.
I think it's good for the people who are going abroad and learning new perspectives and new customs and values. I think it engenders more empathy, and I hope I'm open-minded enough to feel the same about some tourists to where I live as well.
It's a beautiful sentiment.
Well, I, for one, just cannot wait for this summer when I post a picture of myself standing in front of an enormous golf ball and cryptically tag it, "Keep Orlando Beautiful."
Well, on that note, I think we can wrap up. It was so great talking to both of you.
So nice, Molly. Thanks, Catherine.
Likewise. Safe travels.
Safe travels. This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Demir Marusic, Chris Sullentrop, and Jasmine Green, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know how you're thinking about travel and tourism these days. Email impromptu@washpost.com. And if you're enjoying the show, please follow us on your favorite podcast app and tell your friends to tune in. Do not gatekeep. We'll be back in your feed next week.